More hot cocoa, more nights around the tree, and more of the Nutcracker and the Mouse King. Tonight we begin with Chapter 11, The Victory. Not long after, Maria had awakened one moonlit night by a strange rattling that seemed to come out of the corner of the chamber. It sounded as if little stones were being thrown and rolled about, and every now and again there was a terrible squeaking and squealing. "Ah, the mice are coming again," exclaimed Maria in a fright. And she was not about to wake her mother, but her voice failed her, and she could stir neither hand nor foot, for when she saw the Mouse King work his way out of the hole in the wall, then run with sparkling eyes and crowns around the chamber, when, at last, with a desperate leap, he sprang upon the little table that stood close to her bed. "He must give me thy sugar plums, thy gingerbread, little thing, or I will bite thy nutcracker, thy nutcracker." So squeaked the Mouse King, and snapped and grated hideously with his teeth, then sprung down again and ran through the hole in the wall. Maria was so distressed by this occurrence that she looked very pale in the morning and was scarcely able to say a word. 100 times was she going to inform her mother or Louise of what had happened, or at least to tell Fred, but she thought, "No one will believe me, and I shall only be laughed at." This, at least, was very clear, that if she wished to save little Nutcracker, she must give up her sugar plums and her gingerbread. So, in the evening, she laid all that she had, and she had a great deal, down before the foot of the glass case. The next morning her mother said, "It is strange what brings all the mice all at once to the sitting room. See, poor Maria, they've eaten up all your gingerbread." And so it was. The ravenous Mouse King had not found the sugar plums exactly to his taste, but he had gnawed them with his sharp teeth so that they had to be thrown away anyway. Maria did not grieve about her cake and sugar plums, for she was greatly delighted to think that she had saved little Nutcracker. But what was her terror when the very next night she heard again a squeaking and squealing close to her ear. Ah, the Mouse King was there again, and his eyes sparkled more dreadfully, and he whistled and squeaked much louder than before. "Must give me thy sugar puppets, chocolate figures, little thing, or I will bite thy nutcracker, thy nutcracker." And with this, the terrible Mouse King sprang down and ran away. Maria was very sad. She went the next morning to the glass case and gazed with the most sorrowful looks at her sugar and chocolate figures. And her grief was reasonable, for thou canst not imagine, my attentive listener, what beautiful figures of sugar and chocolate little Maria Stahlbaum possessed. A pretty shepherd and shepherdess watching a whole flock of milk-white lambs, while a little dog frisked about them. Next came 2 letter carriers with letters in their hands, and then 4 neat pairs of nicely dressed boys and girls with gay little ribbons, rocked at a seesaw upon many boards, white and smooth as marble. Behind some dancers stood Farmer Caraway and the Maid of Orleans. These Maria did not care so much about, but close in a corner stood her darling, a little red-cheeked baby, and now the tears came into her eyes. "Oh, dear Master Drosselmeyer," she said, turning to Nutcracker, "there is nothing that I would not do to save you, but this is very hard." Nutcracker looked all the while so sorrowfully that Maria, who felt as if she had saw the Mouse King open all 7 of his mouths to devour the unhappy youth, resolved to sacrifice them all. So, at evening, she placed all her sugar figures down at the foot of the glass case, just as she had done before with her sugar plums and cake. She kissed the shepherd, and the shepherdess at last took her darling, the little red-cheeked baby, out of the corner and placed it down behind all the rest. Farmer Caraway and the Maid of Orleans must stand in the front row. "Well, that is too bad," said her mother the next morning. "A mouse must have gotten into the glass case, for all of poor Maria's sugar figures are gnawed and bitten in pieces." Maria could not keep from shedding tears, but she soon smiled again and said to herself, "That is nothing, if Nutcracker is only saved." In the evening her mother told the counselor of the mischief which the mouse had been doing in the glass case, and said, "It is provoking that we cannot destroy this fellow that makes such havoc with Maria's toys." "Ha!" cried Fred merrily. "The baker opposite has a fine gray secretary of legation. Should I bring him over? He will soon make an end of the thing. He will have the mouse's head off very quickly, even be it Lady Mouserings herself, or her son, the Mouse King." "And jump about the tables and chairs," said his mother, laughing, "and throw down cups and saucers, and do all kinds of mischief of its own." "Ah, no, indeed," said Fred. "The baker's secretary of legation is a light, careful fellow. I wish I could walk on the roof of the house as well as he." "Let us have no cats in the night," said Louise, who could not bear them. "Fred's plan is the best," said the doctor. "But we will try a trap first. Have we got one?" "Godfather Drosselmeyer can make them best," said Fred, "for he invented them." All laughed, and when the mother said that there was no mouse-trap in the house, the counselor assured her that he had a number in his possession, and immediately sent for one. In a short time it was brought, and a very excellent mouse-trap it seemed to be. The story of the hard nut now came vividly to the minds of the children. As the cook toasted the fat, Maria shook and trembled. Her head was full of the story and its wonders. She said to her old friend Dora, "Ah, great queen, take care of Lady Mouserings and her family." But Fred had drawn his sword and cried, "Let them come on! Let them come on! I will scatter them!" But all remained still and quiet under the hearth, as the counselor tied the fat to a fine piece of thread, and set the trap softly, softly down by the glass case. Fred cried out, "Take care, Godfather Mechanist, or Mouse King will surely play a trick." Ah, but what a night did Maria pass! Something cold as ice tapped here and there against her arm, and crept rough and hideous upon her cheek, and squeaked and squealed in her ear. The hateful Mouse King sat upon her shoulder. He opened his 7 blood-red mouths, and grating and snapping his teeth, he squeaked and hissed in her ear. Wise mouse goes not into the house, goes not to the feast, like sugar things best, craft set at naught, will not be caught. Give all new frock, picture books, all the best, or shall have no rest. I will tear and bite the Nutcracker at night." Maria was so full of sorrow and anxiety. She looked very pale and disturbed on the following morning when Fred told her that the mouse had not been caught, so that the mother thought that she was grieving for her sugar things, or perhaps was afraid of the mouse. "Do not grieve, dear child," she said. "We will get rid of him soon. If the trap does not answer, Fred shall bring his gray secretary of legation." As soon as Maria was alone in the sitting-room, she stepped to the glass case and said, sobbing to Nutcracker, "Oh, my dear good Mr. Drosselmeyer, what can I, poor unhappy maiden, do? For if I should give up all of my picture books and even my new beautiful frock to the hateful mouse, he will ask for more and more, and when I have nothing left to give him, he will at last want me instead of you to bite into pieces." As little Maria grieved and sorrowed in this way, she observed a large spot of blood on the Nutcracker's neck, which had been there ever since the battle. Now, after Maria had known that her Nutcracker was young Drosselmeyer, the counselor's nephew, she did not carry him any more in her arms, nor hug and kiss him as she used to do. Indeed, she would very seldom move or touch him, but when she saw the spot of blood, she took him very carefully from the shelf and commenced rubbing it away with her pocket handkerchief. But what was her astonishment when she felt that he suddenly grew warm in her hand and began to move. She put him quickly back upon the shelf again when, behold, his little mouth began to work and twist and move up and down, and at last, with a great deal of labor, he lisped out, "Ah, dearest best Miss Stolbaum, excellent friend, how shall I thank you? No, no picture books, no Christmas frock. Get me a sword, a sword. For the rest, Here speech left him, and his eyes, which had begun to express the deepest sympathy, again became staring and motionless. Maria did not feel the least terror. On the contrary, she leapt for joy, for she had now found a way to rescue Nutcracker without any more painful sacrifices. But where would she obtain a sword for him? Maria at last resolved to ask Fred for advice, and in the evening, when their parents had all gone out, they sat alone together in the chamber by the glass case. She told him all that had happened to the Nutcracker and the Mouse King, and begged him to furnish the little fellow a sword. Upon no part of this narration did Fred reflect so long and so earnestly as upon the poor account which she gave him of the bravery of his hussars. He asked once more very seriously if it were so. Maria assured him of it upon her word, when Fred ran quickly to the glass case, addressed his hussars in a very moving speech, and then, as a punishment for their cowardice, cut their military badges from their capes and forbade them for a year to play the Grand Hussar's March. After this, he turned again to Maria and said, "As to a sword, I can easily supply the little fellow with one. Only yesterday I permitted an old colonel of the cuirassiers to retire upon a pension, and consequently he has no further use for such a fine saber as his." The aforesaid colonel was living on the pension which Fred had allowed him, in the farthest corner of the third shelf. He was brought out, his fine silver saber taken from him, and buckled about the Nutcracker. Maria could scarcely seem to get any sleep that night. She was so anxious, so fearful. About midnight it seemed to her as if she heard a strange rustling and rattling and slashing in the sitting room. All at once it went "Queek!" "The Mouse King! The Mouse King!" cried Maria, and sprang in her fright out of bed. All was still, but presently she heard a gentle knocking at the door, and a soft voice was heard. "Worthiest, best, kindest Miss Stolbaum, open the door without fear. Good tidings." Maria knew the voice of the young Drosselmeyer, so she threw her frock about her, opened the door, and little Nutcracker stood without, with a bloody sword in his right hand and a wax taper in his left. As soon as he saw Maria, he bent down on one knee and said, "You, O lady, you alone it was that filled me with knightly courage, and gave this arm strength to contend with the presumptuous foe who dared to disturb your slumber. The treacherous Mouse King is overcome. He lies bathed in his own blood. Scorn not to receive the tokens of victory from a knight who will remain devoted to your service until death." With these words, Nutcracker took off the 7 crowns of the Mouse King which he had hung upon his left arm, and reached them to Maria, who received them with great joy. Nutcracker then arose and said, "Best, kindest Miss Stolbaum, you know not what beautiful things I could show you at this moment while my enemies lie vanquished, if you would have the condescension to follow me but a few steps. Oh, will you not be so kind? Will you not be so good, Miss Best, kindest Miss Stolbaum?" Chapter 12. The Puppet Kingdom. I believe that none of you, listeners, would have hesitated for an instant to follow the good, honest Nutcracker, who could never have meditated any evil. Maria consented to follow him, so much the more readily because she knew what claims she had upon his gratitude, and because she was convinced that he would keep his word and show her many beautiful things. "I will go with you, Master Drosselmeyer," she said, "but it must not be far, and it must not be long, for as yet I have hardly had any sleep." "I will choose, then," replied Nutcracker, "the nearest, though a more difficult way." He went onward, and Maria followed, until he stopped before a large antique wardrobe which stood in the hall. Maria perceived, to her astonishment, that the doors of this wardrobe, which were always kept locked, now stood wide open, so that she could see her father's fox-furred traveling coat which hung in front. Nutcracker clambered very nimbly up the carved figures and ornaments until he could grasp a large tassel which hung down the back of the coat, and was fastened to it by a thick cord. As soon as Nutcracker pulled upon the tassel, a neat little stairs of cedar wood stretched down from the sleeve of the traveling coat to the floor. "Ascend, if you please, dearest miss," cried the Nutcracker. Maria did so, but scarcely had she gone up in the sleeve, scarcely had she seen her way out at the collar, when a dazzling light broke forth upon her, and all at once she stood upon a sweet-smelling meadow, surrounded by millions of sparks, which darted up like flashing jewelry. "We are now upon Candy Meadow," said the Nutcracker, "but we will pass directly through yonder gate." When Maria looked up, she saw the beautiful gate which stood a few steps before them upon the meadow. It seemed built of variegated marble, of white, brown, and raisin color, but when Maria came nearer, she perceived that the whole mass consisted of sugar and almond and raisins, kneaded and baked together, for which reason the gate, as Nutcracker assured her when they passed through it, was called the Almond and Raisin Gate. Upon a gallery built over the gate, made apparently of barley sugar, there were 6 apes in red jackets who struck up the finest Turkish music which was ever heard, so that Maria scarcely observed they were walking onward and onward over a rich mosaic, which was nothing else other than a pavement of nicely inlaid lozenges. Very soon the sweetest odors streamed around them, which wafted from a wonderful little wood that opened on either side before them. There it shone and sparkled so among the dark leaves that the golden and silvery fruit could plainly be seen hanging from their gaily colored stems, while the trunks and branches were ornamented with ribbons and nosegays. When the orange perfume stirred and moved like a soft breeze, how it rustled among the boughs and leaves, and the golden fruit rocked and rattled in merry music, to which the bright, dancing sparkles kept time. "Oh, how delightful it is here!" cried Maria, entranced in happiness. "We are in the Christmas wood, best miss," said the Nutcracker. "Oh, if I could linger here but a while!" cried Maria. "Oh, it is too charming!" Nutcracker clapped his hands, and some little shepherds and shepherdesses and hunters and huntresses came near, were so delicate and white that they seemed to be made of pure sugar. They brought her a dainty little armchair, all of gold, laid upon it a green cushion of candied citron, and invited Maria very politely to sit down. She did so, and immediately the shepherds and shepherdesses danced a very pretty ballet, while the hunters very obligingly blew their horns, and then all disappeared again in the bushes. "Pardon, kindest Miss Stallbaum," said Nutcracker. "The dance was miserably performed, but the people all belong to our company of wire dancers, and they can do nothing but the same thing. They are deficient in variety, and the hunters blew so dull and lazily, but shall we not walk a little further?" "Oh, it was all very pretty, and pleased me very much," said Maria as she rose and followed. They now walked along by a soft rustling brook, out of which all the sweet perfume seemed to arise, which filled the whole wood. "This is the Orange Brook," said Nutcracker, but its fine perfume accepted, it cannot compare either in size or beauty with Lemonade River, which like it empties into Orgiat Lake. In fact, Maria very soon heard a loud rustling and dashing, and then beheld the broad Lemonade River, which rolled in proud cream-colored billows between banks covered in bright green bushes. A refreshing coolness arose out of its noble waves. Not far off, a dark yellow stream dragged itself lazily along, but it gave forth a very sweet odor, and a great number of little children sat on the shore angling for little fish, which they ate up as soon as they caught. When Maria came nearer, she observed that these fish were shaped almost like peanuts. At a distance there was a very neat little village on the borders of this stream. Houses, churches, parsonages, barns were all dark brown, but many of the roofs were gilded, and some of the walls were painted so strangely that it seemed as if little sugar plums and bits of citron were stuck upon them. "That is Gingerbreadville," said Nutcracker, "which lies on the Molasses River. Very pretty people live in it, but they are a little ill-tempered because they suffer a good deal from toothache, so we will not visit it." At this moment, Maria observed a little town in which houses were clear and transparent and of different colors, which was a very pretty sight to see. Nutcracker went straight forward towards it, and now Maria heard a busy, merry clatter, and saw 1,000 tiny little figures collected around some heavily laden wagons. They had stopped in the market. These they unloaded, and what they took out looked like sheets of colored paper and chocolate cakes. "We are now in Bonbon Town," said Nutcracker. "An importation has just arrived from Paperland and from King Chocolate himself. These poor people of Bonbon Town are often terribly threatened by the armies of Generals Fly and Gnat, for which reason they fortify their houses with stout materials from Paperland and throw up fortifications of the strong bulwarks, which King Chocolate sends to them. But, worthiest Miss Stallbaum, we will not visit all these little towns and villages of this land. We go to the capital. To the capital." Nutcracker hastened forward, and Maria followed, full of curiosity. It was not long before a sweet odor of roses enveloped them, and everything around was touched with a soft rose-colored tint. Maria soon observed that this was the reflection of the red glancing lake, which rustled and danced before them, with charming and melodious tones in little rosy waves. Beautiful silver-white swans with golden collars swam all over the lake, singing sweet tunes, while little diamond fish dipped up and down in the rosy water as if in the merriest dance. "Ah!" exclaimed Maria ardently, "this is then the lake which Godfather Drosselmeyer was going to make for me, and I myself am the maiden who is to fondle and caress the dear swans." Nutcracker laughed in a scornful manner, such as Maria had never observed in him before, and then said, "Godfather Drosselmeyer can never make anything like this. You yourself, rather sweetest Miss Stallbaum. But we will not trouble our heads about that right now. Let us sail across the Rose Lake to the capital."